for joining us. Katchie Ananda, thank you for coming on to the summit today, Yoga Beyond Exercise. Welcome.
Thank you, Julie. It's a pleasure to be here. A lot is being driven by fear now, and if we want to get out of this mess, we're going to have to take each other's fear seriously. We have to acknowledge it. We can't say, and then I said, which fear is driving you? Number one, the virus. Number two, the medical or technocrat tyranny. Number three, poverty, like fear of poverty. And if one person has one fear, you can't try to talk the other person out of it. And this is basically what's happening. It's like there are these fear bodies or these pain bodies are battling with each other, and instead of listening and acknowledging, okay, I hear you being afraid of this virus. I understand, I understand this is, whatever it is, like, I believe it's a virus that's like the flu, or maybe a bit worse, or maybe less worse. What do I know? And it affects certain people. It's certainly not as deadly as we thought it was. And why haven't we corrected course? So, which means that other people will be more afraid of an impending tyranny or taking away rights. I see it all over the world. It's like basically people fall into this camp of either trusting the powers of be or not trusting the powers of be. And it's basically a clean, cut through. It's really interesting for me to see. And I noticed that people who've had perhaps bad experiences in the past where an authority figure reached their confidence, they tend to question more, like, well, why are we doing this? And like, we're having all these contradictory like rules, like that doesn't make any sense. Why are we doing this? And then other people are so focused on this fear that they don't want to acknowledge that fear. And but if we can't hear each other and acknowledge, like, I hear you being afraid of X, Y, and Z, how can we move together in some ways? And I carry your fear, and if you carry mine, but that's not what's happening, right? It's not happening. It's basically people's fear body battling with each other who is right. And nobody will win, because you can't, like, if somebody has a fear of height and another person has a fear of a spider, you're not going to talk the person with fear of height out of being fearful of heights. It's not going to happen. So no matter how much we think that we're right and we accuse the other person of being wrong, it's not going to help anybody. So my kind of, and I have to watch that part of me, because I can be a warrior woman, just like the best body. And I do get into that position, like when I feel attacked or something, and I'm constantly softening back. And it's like, okay, so how can I hear you better? And hopefully be an example of how we can bring us together. Because it's like, it's heartbreaking to see this split through this country and through the world. And it's like, it's deepening as we speak. And I don't even want to go into what's behind that, or if, or is it, or it is, or it isn't, but just the split itself. It's like, basically when you have divorced parents and, like, you need to take a side, right? It's painful. No. So I think that the great work today is to hear each other's fear, to acknowledge it, and then to try to find a way of communicating with each other so that it all can be held. And hopefully, we can do that. So that's, in a nutshell, my thoughts a little bit around that.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I mean, we have to recognize what we're afraid of. and it's going to be maybe different in any given moment, but that fear needs to come to the surface so that it can dissolve. You have to do the inquiry about where does it come from and is it true? Instead of
Yes.
just blindly believing every thought. I think what's going on in the world right now is just a perfect mirror for that. Like, it's like, okay, I'm watching the news and I'm hearing information. But instead of questioning, like, is this true? I'm giving my attention to this and then just expecting that they are telling me the truth. It's the same with the thoughts, right? It's like, oh, I have a thought in my mind, then it must be true. Well, I think we can all safely say that not all thoughts we've ever had are actually true. They take inquiry and investigation, and and that takes time and diligence and willingness,
Yes.
and surrender.
That's what I was thinking when you first started. So, my background is in yoga and Buddhism as well, and in the Buddhist philosophy, as I've learned from Jack Kornfield, that I've studied for 20 years. First, you have to see things as they are. There's no spin to it, like no positive, no negative. It's just seeing it as it is. Like that's one part of the path to freedom. They say that the bird needs two wings to fly, and the
Mhm.
first wing is seeing things as they are, and then the second one is basically the Brahma Viharas, which is the response to it. Like sometimes we need compassion, sometimes we need loving kindness, sometimes we need equanimity, sometimes we get to be joyful with that. So that's basically the other wing of the bird. Is like, but there's such a trend to not wanting to see things as they are. And I have kind of been in that situation before. I was part of a yoga tradition, and for years I was saying, well, there are things that are going that are not right. I would actually speak it. I would say, well, there are things, and it actually had to do with that. It's like we can't just do positive thinking all the time. It has nothing to do with giving your energy. It has to see, first you have to still see it, whether it's negative or positive. Who the hell knows whether it's going to be positive or negative? We all have had these experiences where something happened that we thought was really negative. It turned out the best thing that ever happened to us, because our trajectory shifted because of it. So, but the first thing is we have to bow to what is. And that exactly happened in that yoga tradition. And I was one of the people who called it early on. And I was ostracized, right? It's like when I think both sides, if you will, if you can say it that way, have a cult like mentality about them and don't accept any view that differs from their hive mind, from their bubble. And that's a really dangerous thing. Like I've observed that in cults so many times, or in cult like movements. And anybody who is going to point out, hey, there's something that's not right here, they're usually not treated very well, I've noticed. And it doesn't matter whether the people are on the left, the supposedly good side, or the people on the right, the supposedly bad side, which, is what the, the kind of discourse is now. So, yeah, the first thing is to see things as they are and to allow for other viewpoints. That's like the mind has to be constantly challenged with different concepts, because, like you said so beautifully, you can't even trust your own thoughts. Like if you were listening to your own thoughts, you would say, lock this person up, right? Like if you really were conscious of all the crap that you're thinking to yourself, like one moment you're like the next innovator of something, and then the next you're a homeless person. I mean, the mind has no shame. It will grab onto any kind of thing. And we don't even notice half of it, but it goes on. So if we had a person whispering our thoughts to us, we'd be like, Uncle, somebody save me from this lunatic. Yet we tend to believe things, especially if they're unexamined. So it's just time for all of us to really examine what is the truth, what matters, and this is the time to practice, right? And to trust your intuition. Like, it's in the end, it's also there's an energetic quality to it. I'm not going to be hanging out with people who are constantly vilifying me or hating on me or something. So it's really interesting when you notice it on a energetic quality. And it's like sometimes I'm like, on the left, we're turning into the things that we oppose. That's what I'm noticing. We're opposing fascism and hatred and this, that, and the other. But there are so many who are actually exhibiting those very behaviors that they are opposing. And it's like I just said that this morning to somebody. It's not the anti-fascist that makes you an anti-fascist. It's the label doesn't mean anything. It's your actions that make you one thing or another. It's not what you label yourself with. I mean, most of the crusades and horrible things that have happened in history, they were never set out like we're the bad guys and we're gonna, they were always under some kind of noble concept, right? And then the most horrible things happen under that concept. So the label is just not good enough. We all have to really look and say, okay, well, that really doesn't seem right. So
I mean, that's such a good point to what's happening today, which is interesting. And I'm sure you'll hear in Buddhism, we talk about labels and how we make that a label makes the thing that's constantly in motion a thing. And then we have all these thoughts about it, and then opinions about it, and assumptions about it. And it seems like that's what's happening so deeply. Exactly what you were just saying. It's not the label fascist, socialist, liberal, Democrat. It doesn't even matter. It's how you act. Like, it's not about racism. It's like, do you see another person as less than you or more than you or as different than you? It's like, and then how are you then acting because of that thought, or that thought that becomes an emotion and a feeling, and people I was also surprised to see the split, and actually then in turn inspired by it, because I just I just feel and know that we all come from the same place, and it's just a slightly different perspective sometimes that makes like the greatest shifts. We're like, oh, because that's what's happened for me for sure. And it resonates. And then all of a sudden, my mind starts unlocking all of this, dormant potential. And everything opens up. So, hence us having this conversation now.
beautiful.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah, we have to all really investigate our deeper, the drives, not just like the fears. It's good if people can really get in touch with what's driving their emotional response to things. That's one thing, but there's also so much guilt. And, that really worries me even more. Like, shame and guilt and fear have never been good bedfellows. And I see so many people like being shamed or guilted into accepting certain concepts that are like, to me, really like this just doesn't resonate to me. Like, let's say about I was married to a black man when I was 22. I'm part Brazilian. And my best girlfriend is Black. And I have been at the forefront of social justice before it became trendy, like a long time ago. I would do spiritual activation and all that. And but then I kind of like, I don't know, like it was in 2005 or something, like I noticed the tone changed. And all of a sudden, like what really worries me is that now it is no longer, doesn't seem to be about, um, it doesn't seem to be about healing anymore. It just seems to be about revenge and inverting any kind of actual equality in the end. Or I don't know, it's a very interesting thing. I see, you know, and I see guilt playing a lot. Like I see people who are accepting certain things, like just because you're white, you're always going, it's like a disease that you can never be rid of. I don't believe that. I don't believe that if you're born white, that you will have this disease of racism and you can never get rid of it. But this is the new discourse now, that that this is, you've never heard of it? Oh
I
yeah,
know.
this is driving the discourse, and it's no longer about actually healing racism. It's about admitting, if you're a white person, you're supposed to admit that you're a racist and you will always be a racist, and there is no healing from that. And that's why, like, and there's unfortunately so much guilt, white guilt, that people buy into this. And that's why, like, you know, people, white people like Robin DiAngelo, who is the author of this White Fragility book, which is utter crap. It's a bestseller. Like people are spending, she's getting rich. She's charging like, you know, $10,000 for, like, you know, to go on campus and talk about white people buying into this white guilt. And basically you have to confess to your sins, and that you are a racist and you always will be a racist and there's no healing from it. And I'm just like, I don't believe that. I don't think that. You know, I totally believe in that there's some systemic racism. There's no doubt about it. That's has to be healed. You know, too many black bodies go to the prison, and all that, and we have to heal that. Like often black people are treated differently. There is sometimes suspicion, but a lot of the rhetoric that we hear, it just isn't true. You know, it just isn't true. It's like, and I see these like young middle class white people, like, you know, hurling racial, they're supposedly the anti-fascists, but they're hurling these racial slurs at black cops. I've seen it on videos. They tell them like, you have, your nose is too big, and you know, like racial slurs, like horrible things. And these are like 20-year-old, you know, white kids, middle class white kids, who are thinking they are protesting for Black Lives Matter. Yet because this person is a black cop, he doesn't count, she doesn't count. It's really interesting. It's almost like this whole discourse, like the this movement has become very cult-like to me, from what I can tell, because I do have experience in cult. So
Well,
yes, this is happening.
I was at a conference about a month ago called the Red Pill Expo, and there was this fabulous woman speaking, and actually her talk is up on my Facebook page. And she shared, she's a Black woman. She was sharing about how the word white came into our culture and society. It was planted in there because think about it, like I'm only second generation American. Everybody came to the United States, which is just a label that some people came up with, you know, and everybody was a mixed culture of
Yeah.
people. And then, you know, slaves were being captured, stolen. People were being stolen and brought over. They did not apply for a job. They were stolen and brought over here and forced to work for no money. And here then you had these groups of people intermingling. Well, they interjected the word white. And so racism certainly is a, it's been injected into our culture and way of being. And I think that's what is so important about understanding really truly what yoga is, or really about being human. And I don't even like the word human, because the word human means hue, color of man. Like we're human because of a word that was told to us, and we're man and womankind. There's one tenet, and it's do no harm. So every man or woman that's born is bound by that one tenet of do no harm. And that is our birthright. And it's the ignorance, and it's just been injected into us, into our mind streams. So getting to the heart, right? The heart of who we are, and not just, this goes back to what we were just talking about, and like information is not just coming in and then we are told like, oh, you have to believe it. Are you this or this? There's no in between. It's like, no, I am consciousness. I am infinity itself in this physical body, and I'm constantly expanding, because that's really the only true thing, is that everything's in constant motion. There is nothing that is, stable, set, not gonna move. So that includes human beings, or man and womankind. We're constantly in a state of flux, and that's beautiful. It's like you can see in what's going on right now, like the tighter people hold on to their beliefs, like the more suffering they experience. Like I've never been happier in my whole life, because I felt like finally it's moving. I mean, I was like all my lifetimes just flooded into like this one experience, and I'm like, it's here. It's happening, because people I could never speak to before are like my best friends, because like more people are awake to like energy, frequency, and vibration. Tesla talked about this in his lifetime, and like it's all there, and it's always been there, and it's just inside of us, and nobody needs to tell us. Nobody needs to tell me what's right. You were just saying like we have to know what's right for us. And it's like, if you can't stop and feel into whether it's right for you, well, that's, I think, the biggest issue. Like a 20-year-old yelling, thinking that, there's my logical brain is like, how can you say your Black Lives Matter and then yell racial slurs at someone? I know that doesn't feel good.
I saw a young white man yelling at Dr. Stella Emanuel. She's a doctor, medical doctor, has been treating patients very successfully for quite some time. She was one of those doctors who stood at the White House, one of the medical doctors. It went viral and then it got censored. And this young man like got into her face, and he accused her, and he said, I am more black on the inside than you are. And I was like looking at it, I was like, whoa, dude, it was actually quite a humorous. She just stood there. She was like, what the fuck, man? It's like this big black mama, like she's fierce. She's beautiful. I love her.
Oh, I saw that video.
She's like, whoa, what do you say to that? Like, yeah. So there's this kind of, it's an ideology. That's the problem. It's when anything gets ideologically, like in a cult, right? Then you cannot accept anything other than that. And that's where we are. And just a lot of the people on the left haven't noticed that this has been moving in that direction for quite some time. And yeah, I wanted to respond to you before I forget about, I used to love watching good movies or a good series or something. I haven't watched much in like months because life has become like a movie. It's I just stop, like, it's because it's like I'm like there's so much happening. It's like so interesting, and I'm open like you are, and I'm just looking at everything, and I'm like, no, that doesn't resonate so much, or yeah, there's almost like when something comes at me, there is like almost like I see a thread in there of something that really I believe like is interesting, and so then I follow that, and that's how I've discovered extraordinary things in the last 2 years. If my journey started looking into the gender ideology, and maybe I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's been kind of an interesting discovery, and that has also very cult-like um, tenets to it, very cult-like tenets. And I'm just like, wait a minute, can we at least talk about this? No, we can't talk about it. When you want to talk about this, you get canceled. That's what's happening, so you can't talk about it. And unless you're a very brave woman, yeah, then you will do it anyways, but you will probably lose your job and get canceled. I did. I lost a job. I got banned, and but it hasn't stopped me to speak out, because I never will stop speaking out on behalf of women, on behalf of truth, on behalf of courage, whatever. It's important to me. When I was 14 years old, I read my girlfriend at the time, Isabel. She gave me the trilogy of Lord of the Rings as 14 or 15 or something, and I locked myself into my room for 5 days. I didn't come out, and I read all three of them day and night in those 5 days, and it became my absolute favorite book story ever. I have probably read it like once every few years again. Now we have the movie too, which is really good as well. And when this whole thing started, I was like, we're in the Lord of the Rings now. We are in the Lord of the Rings, and you know, every time when it gets really dark, when I feel like, whoa, there's some really sinister things going on, um, then I recall scenes out of the Lord of the Rings, like when it got really dark, when suddenly the eagles came in. Every time when I see that scene or read that scene, like I get chills, right? Or the ants, right? The ants like awakened, the ants, the trees, the ancient trees. So it's like, yeah, to fight on the side of life, to fight on the side of what is good and true, and not machine, not technology, but what is life-giving things. And I really do believe we're in the middle of a war now. It's like, well, it's either going to be humans or humankind and women, or mankind and womankind, as you say, or the alternative is going to be maybe some other alternative future that I don't want on this earth. I'm always like, why don't they go and fulfill that fantasy of AI and cyborg on another planet and leave us be here with our innocent little creature bodies and our direct path to the divine. That this is not it's basically how I see it, Julie, is a, a mistaken identity. It's like, yes, I understand why AI and technology has this thrall, and it's really amazing, isn't it? In some ways, like you can do so many things like with technology, but these people have never really experienced the joy of being in this body that is going to die, and accept that. Like, and despite of it, like, you know, you don't give a person a plastic rose. Why don't you? Like, it would keep forever. Why do you give a person a rose that is going to unfold its beauty for a few short days and smell? All your senses are going to be enchanted for a few days, and then what? It dies. You would never give somebody a plastic rose, right? So it's a mistaken worldview that you can control or, you know, make it smarter, upload it to the machine, but you're missing out on something that we instinctively know, that connection to the divine, that there is something more than, you know, this. If you were to offer me immortality by uploading myself to a machine, I would never do it, because I don't believe, I would never want to be imprisoned in my body. It's like, and with no way out. That's what a horrible thought. Like, I do want to die. I want to be part of this earth, of Mama Earth, with the innocent little creatures, just like, you know, dogs. It's like, it gives me such joy. Food. I don't want to eat crap that has been grown in laboratories. I want to eat food of the earth. I want to be a part of the earth. I want to protect this, because this transcends right into spirit. And I think whoever is driving this vision that's coming down the pike doesn't is not connected to that vision, which is why the alternative of AI and technology has such a allure. They want to do transhumanism. You know, they're interested in that, and it's just a differing worldview. When I look at Bill Gates, you know, I'm like, I understand Bill Gates. I don't actually even think that he's evil or anything. Like, he means really well. I just don't ascribe to his view, like, of, you know, of what he believes is going to save humanity is our vaccines. I don't think that way. I don't think that it's technology that's going to save humanity. I think it's connection to spirit that's going to save humanity. And to accept that part of it is to accept your innocent little creature body. This is all I've been teaching. Like, do not mistake your yoga for an idea of control. People have done that. Like, I've done that in the beginning, and it makes me so sad. Yoga is for everybody, and yoga is learning to deal with your innocent little creature body like it was a dog. You don't have to mistreat it. You don't have to, like, you know, make it horrible. Like, I say, if you say yoga to your body, like, let's go do some yoga, it is like you're saying to your dog, let's go for a walk. You know, your body should be at the door wagging its tail with the leash in the mouth already, out of joy. It's like when you do yoga practice, you go into your innocent little creature body. You go to play, you go to breathe, you smell, you see, you envision, you connect. That's what yoga practice is, not some kind of sinister form of controlling so you can be bendy and twisty. That's all a lie. So it's just this in my estimation, it's this false view of why we're here. We are here to be in this innocent little creature body. So that's why I'm rejecting this, whatever this is. I will never take this vaccine. You know, no, not for this disease. I'm not saying I'm anti-vaccines, because I'm not. You know, I have taken vaccines. Certain vaccines may be a good thing. Maybe, you know, I will hold and look what's in them, and then use my judgment. It may be a good thing, but certainly not this one. I will not take this one, because there's no way it's going to be safe. There's too much crap in there that nobody knows what it is and why it's in there. No, I'm not going to take it. So for me, the path forward is, how can we mobilize enough people to not go along with that? That's where I draw the line. No, I'm not going to, you're not getting my body to inject things into that without my consent. It's not going to happen. So I don't think they're actually, this is going to be the outcome. if that's what they're hoping for, I actually think they will fail.
Oh yeah, they'll fail. What I've learned is we're constantly giving consent and we don't know it. And that's that difference between law and legal. So I'm putting a notice outside my house that says that a woman lives here, which means I'm not a citizen. Once you say you're a citizen, you've given consent to be a part of a system. And it actually goes back to when people used to get lost at sea. And so that's the legal system. Like when a judge walks into the court, all rise, it's all rise from the dead. Is like, and then you're giving consent, like that I'm now arisen from the dead and now I'm in giving consent to you. It's fascinating. I'm looking at it as a path to enlightenment, so to speak, because it just takes you back to the self, because once you know who you are have no fear. And when you were talking, I was thinking, like, I think the thing why people are kind of going off thinking in this way of separatism from the whole and willing to take a vaccine and play into the fears, because ultimately they're afraid of death, like the cycles. Like that's what the nature thing is. It's like, I'm not afraid of dying. I know this body is going to die someday. It's died thousands, hundreds of thousands of times before. But what I do with my time in between, you know, is what I get in this existence. But the soul is experiencing infinity. And I kind of see that whole AI movement. I think I read something recently that, oh my God, Elon Musk said, oh my God, I'm sorry. I think this is also funny. He's like, he's like humans, people need to merge with AI. That's the future. I'm like, that's not my future. That is not my future. I never will merge with AI. That's giving consent to have your soul be put into a jail cell. That's slavery. And it's like, I'm free. I don't need you to tell me what to do, Elon Musk. I'm not afraid. I know as a womankind on this earth, my birthright, and it was given to me by nature of that. If you cross that line, that's your karma. Then we're in this like karmic dance. But we have this opportunity now to free ourselves from that. And that's my wish for all people, is to kind of step back and do that inquiry and start questioning, like, what is this? I don't do anything unless I am like fully engaged with myself first. Even doing these conversations with people, I'm like, it's just so that's why I changed the name of it to conversations, because I think there's so much beauty in just two or more coming together. And like you were saying, talking about it. So once you say no, there's no conversation, you've cut off all like lifeblood. There's no oxygen that's able to come in. I know I've changed as a person through these interactions, and for the better, like more expanded, even if it's just overcoming my own fears and insecurities about doing this. It's like, it doesn't matter. It's just all good because it's all oxygen and air and love and and soul expression coming through. I think there's been a lot of interjected fear about like just being, like there's more to do here than just to be. I heard you say in one of your interviews about that fight or flight, and I think that's like something we could talk about, is like the sympathetic nervous system versus the parasympathetic nervous system, because even somebody listening to this, like, they might go, ah, and it's like, wait a minute. What's going on? What is happening in my body right now? Because this is like the most precious tool that we have right now in this lifetime. But maybe you could talk to that, the sympathetic nervous system and the fight or flight.
Well, so my hypothesis is that pretty much everybody is traumatized. It is just part of being human too, is to be traumatized. Some of us are a bit more, some of us are a bit less, but everybody has had trauma. And unfortunately, trauma kind of splits our soul or our spirit a little bit off sometimes. So, in order to deal with it, and we either get to retrieve those parts again later by healing the trauma, and unconsciously we want to repeat the trauma over and over again in the actually unconsciously we're seeking to heal it. So we tend to, like, if you have an abandonment trauma that is unhealed, you will keep on um, finding yourself in love with a person that will trigger that abandonment. So they have their own unhealed trauma and they threaten. I noticed that with my husband early on, because I did have an abandonment trauma, and in the beginning, even though I knew he was different, I knew he was different, but I remember, like, in the beginning, like when I felt really overwhelmed, or I felt like, oh, it just, it was really difficult, you know, like you're hitting that, that place where, like, oh, and I would threaten, I would say, I don't know if this is going to work out. And, you know, or I would say, like, maybe I should just leave or something. And then I caught myself. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, why am I, like, conjuring up my biggest fear, which is leaving to be left? Why am I doing this? And I realized it was my trauma speaking. So I made a vow. I said, I will never say it again unless actually it's, for whatever reason, it's time, but I will never threaten. And this has been 16 years now, and I never did it. And he will be my husband until the day I die. I'm pretty sure of that. This is it for me. He is such a good man. And so basically, the trauma is what makes us reincarnate and relive these things. And there really is only one path through it, which is to heal. And part of that is that we do get caught when we get triggered in our traumas. We switch over from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic nervous system, which basically gets us into fight, flight, or freeze. And so, which corresponds with the Ayurvedic doshas. So, depending on your Ayurvedic dosha, you're either Vata, Pitta, or Kapha, or a combination thereof. And so you can just easily, you don't have to do a test, you can literally easiest see it when you have a conflict with somebody. um, are you the person who's like, the moment it starts, you just want to, like, go somewhere else, you're like, I'm out of here, you know, your vata, that's your primary dosha, is air, you just want to get out of it. If you are pitta, you notice, like, the moment you get into the argument, like, you're starting, you know, your eyes are getting kind of, you know, your teeth are starting to clench, you know, like the veins are coming out, like you're ready for fighting. So your primary dosha is fire. If you're a mixture of vata and pitta, then you may leave, but you may slam the door on your way out. So you have mostly vata with a little bit of pitta. And if you're kapha, then you're like my husband, who basically just goes like this. Like, he says he's like a puffer fish. When anything, like, when anything is uncomfortable for him, he goes like this. And it's like there's little spikes coming out, and he's like, I'm just gonna wait until this passes. My husband is part native, so it's like, it's this kind of stoic, like, I'm just gonna, like, pretend it isn't happening, and it's just gonna pass by itself. So those are the responses that we have. And the problem is that when we're in these responses of fight, flight, or freeze, we're not thinking long term. We're not, our nervous system is not geared up to come up with solutions with thriving. We're just surviving. And I always say yoga is more than just survive. If you find yourself in a yoga class where you're thrown, triggered into your flight, fight, or freeze. And you can sometimes see that in class when you make a little a harder pose. Like some people immediately have to take their shirts off, like Vata, or they have to go to the bathroom just then, or you can see the pitta. They kind of like, I can do this. They get into the fight, and the entire yoga practice is actually geared via the breath that you yes, you do practice to get into a more stressful position without reacting, without being reactive, without triggering your fight, flight, or freeze, because then you're starting to access other ways of solution. Like you're starting to think, well, what else could I be doing? Like, okay, my first instinct is to just flee. Is there something better than that? Like if you're in an argument, with somebody, instead of just getting the hell out of there, what else could I be doing right now? Is there a way I can express my distress without having to flee, without having to fight, without freezing? And that's really where the practice is. So we all need to learn how to see when it's happening. That's why it's so important that you also understand your dosha, so that you know immediately when that instinct arises, like, oh, I'm ready to fight or I'm ready to freeze. And then say, okay, wait a minute, take a deep breath, do whatever you need to do to get out of the trigger, and then start thinking about what choosing your response. Really, this is the spiritual practice in a nutshell, is that you get, instead of being at mercy of your triggers and your traumas, that you get to choose your response. Like, what would be a win-win situation? What would be a creative solution for this particular problem? And I think basically as a society, that's exactly where we are right now. And it's like we have to learn not to be triggered by the fear, by the freeze, by the fight instinct. And instead it's like, okay, how do I want to choose my response? We have to get out of the how do you say that, hyperbole, right? There's so much hyperbole, especially on the left, like panic, like it's all, there are all these racists out there. No, there aren't. There's actually not that many racists out there. There really aren't. Like, there's the majority of people are good people. It's even the patriots are good people. Are there some knuckleheads that are alt right or racist? Of course they are. Of course they are. But you know what? They're so unpopular. They're hiding in their little hidey holes. Like, they're not like your average person. We have to stop with the like pushing everything into this like bigger than, than it actually is, so that we can take this trigger of fight, flight, or freeze out of the equation and choose. I'm like seeing us destroy this country, and on both sides, the people are actually good people. They really are. I know, because I live in Idaho. It's a purple state. I see the patriots. They're not bad people at all. Most of them are like libertarian types. They just want to be left alone, and they love America, and they just want to be basically living their lives. It's like, so how can we take this like crazy fight, flight, or freeze trauma response out of our interactions, so that we can actually find creative solutions how to get out of it, and then maybe kind of shifting our gaze. This is a little bit maybe conspiratorial or whatever, but it's like, is there somebody behind the scenes that are pulling the strings? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But sometimes I do get suspicious when there's so much division, and it feels like it's being fostered, this division. It doesn't matter between men and women. There is this endless like war now. It's like, then between black and white, it's like there's this sort of like, it does make me feel like, it's weird. Why is there so much division? Why can't we get over this? Why are we focusing on each other maybe we should look a little bit what's kind of past under, you know, which is traditionally not very conspiratorial, because we've seen it before where, you know, like the last crisis, like 9/11, you know, there were all kinds of acts passed through that in retrospect were never lifted, right? Like the right to privacy. Uh, like some people say, never let a crisis go to waste. So instead of maybe fighting each other, maybe we could kind of look at what kind of laws are being passed. You know, I don't, are there people pulling the strings? I don't know, but I do believe that there are people taking advantage of certain things. I also know, which was for me a really big insight, is that there is, I forget how, what the percentage is, so please don't hold me to it, but I recall it was up to 10% um, that of people that are psychopaths. Now, if you know what a psychopath is, you know that a psychopath profile is no empathy. They are incapable of feeling empathy. They're also narcissistic often, and they are drawn to power. So you can safely assume that probably a lot of people who are drawn to power have a narcissistic or a psychopath profile. And if they are the ones making the decision, they may not always be in the, for the benefit of everybody else. And it's just, it's kind of freeing to see that you don't have to say, oh, there's evil people pulling the strings of no, but maybe there's a couple of psychopaths in there somewhere who are just, you know, looking out for themselves. Like you find them, I mean, haven't we seen it, like that these psychopaths, like how many gurus have we seen that fell, like they were super charismatic, and then turned out that they really took advantage of from their followers. They made them work like nonstop to the point of collapse under the, you know, concept of seva. I've seen it many times. And then it turned out that these were, they had psychopathic profiles, and they were also very charismatic, and they also had many good things to say, but they also had a psychopathic profile. So now take that and put it to people pulling the strings, and there you are. It's not some secret conspiracy, blah 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 blah, with, you know, lizard people or whatever. It doesn't have to be that complicated. It could just be a couple of, you know, psychopaths who are looking out for themselves and are good at manipulating and scheming. And we should always be on the guard of those. If anything, you know, on the left has taught you, and I can't believe people on the left are still so easily fooled. It's just, to me, it's really amazing. Like, how many times have we seen it? And still people are like completely not question that this could be a possibility. So yeah, that's how I see it. Like, we should be on guard. We should be paying attention to some of the things that are being passed, and demand that these things, okay, you know, like in the beginning, like I was on board, but I want to know, how long is this lockdown going to continue? Like until we all starve to death? Like I want to have a little bit more of a framework, rather than continuously introducing bills that take the rights of people away. Yeah, I like to see that. I'm just, yeah, it comes down to like, are you what a person that is a little bit more suspicious or not? And I happen to be one of those people. Okay.
So all of that you just said, and I think that's where a lot of people are at or coming to, you know, that questioning of like, what is pulling the strings? I, for some reason, was born to see patterns. And so I could see this at a very young age and tried to tell everybody, but nobody would listen. So I really understand that people will come to it when they're ready. And it, for me, is the deeper perspective of that higher self. Because even me, like I shut down just to fit in. And I'm sure many people do that. We all do it on some level all the time.
For
And
sure.
we disregard our values and kind of moral compass out of fear to like keep jobs, to feed our families, to, you know, have this life that we think is going to bring us joy. But I think that's the game of being a man or a woman, is that we need to make that kind of jump off the cliff. A teacher that I used to like, I read a lot of from him and I felt very connected to, was Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and he had this saying like, you know, don't worry about jumping off the cliff because there's no ground to land on. So it's like you have to jump into the unknown once you know that something isn't working for you. It's like deadening us. I know for me, I can speak from my own experience. It deadens me inside. And then I get like depressed, anxious, like all these emotions start to happen. And then I have to make a choice. Like, is that how I want to feel on a regular basis? Or am I willing to go to the next level? Well, I'm constantly pushing myself to the next level because I have, you know, this ability to just jump off the cliff and not need a ground. Not all the time. Oh, not all the time, but sometimes. And that's enough, because once you do it this much with one thing, then you can do a little like this with another thing. And I remember when I used to think that like politics, like there was actually a candidate that had the best interest. And now I don't believe that at all. I believe the entire system is a cult and they're running us like we belong to a cult. They're indoctrinating us. They have us looking up to them. They're using mind manipulation through media. I mean, if you're watching television or looking at news, you need to know who owns that. I mean, I think there's something like crazy, like 5 families that own the entire system of media. And I mean, almost all of it, except for your like maybe some alt news, you know, alternative news. But it's fascinating when you look behind the curtain and then you start to take responsibility. And that's when you feel empowered, because like these words become buzzwords and part of like a trend, like empowerment. Well, anytime I'm making a decision that somebody told me I had to make, like who to vote for, I'm like, whoa, I'm not going to vote for the lesser of two evils. You know, that's just not, that that's a compromise I'm not willing to make for me. You know, and then somebody might be like, well, you know, blah, 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 you know, voting is your right. And I'm like, yes, it's a choice that I have. And isn't that great? Look at all the choices I have. But once you start like detangling, so to speak, the mind and all of its assumptions that it's making on a moment to moment basis, that's for me where the freedom lies. It lies in like, whoa, wait a minute. I don't have to do that. And that's, I mean, I turned my TV off like, I don't know, 20 something years ago. But I used to watch like shows on Netflix and Hulu, and I have to laugh. You know, if I'm not laughing, then I'm not watching. Because some of the stuff they put in there, I mean, in all of it, even the laughy stuff, it's all propaganda to get people believing that they are limited. We're so not limited. I mean, it always is going to go back to that example for me in the Matrix when Neo is like fighting Mr. Smith or whatever his name was, and he's multiplying and it seems like there's no way out. He's on the subway or whatever. And then he has that aha moment And he realizes the truth of it all for himself is that this isn't real. This is a program running in my mind. And then he's like, eh, it's not even a thing for him. It deactivated. And we're in this time of like deactivation and activation. Like, I just think if people had the crack open just a little bit. Now, I know that you and I have been on this path for a long time, questioning and pulling apart. But when that crack is there and the light gets to come in, it changes everything. And that's when you're willing to look at things differently.
Yeah, that is for me the probably the central question is like, how do we skillfully help people to look, you know? And I'm definitely, I mean, part of my journey has been becoming the most skillful person. Like, I actually believe that yoga, the best translation of yoga is skill in action. That's how I translate yoga, skill in action. It's like, yeah, you can do 100, poses, but can you do them skillfully? Yes, you can do 100 conversation. How skillfully are they? So to me, it's always about skill. Like, can you improve your skill? And I have a long ways to go because I can get combative. Like, I notice myself, like, when I'm usually the only one on a thread with people having a different view. And then I get attacked, and then I get into a little bit of a defensive, or like what I actually don't even get defensive, I get kind of sarcastic, which is also not that nice. It's not, so I'm working on that, like how to skillfully deflect the attacks and not get sarcastic and, just be kind and explain where I'm coming from. I think that's really the edge, and that's where we all should work on. Those of us who perhaps see things from a little bit of a different perspective, that we can skillfully introduce that perspective to other people without shutting them down, without like making them feel stupid, without making them feel like sheep, without making it an us versus them. But yeah, so that's basically what I'm hoping that we will develop. And I'm belonging to a few groups that this is the goal. Like, okay, so how can we skillfully unite and help other people, just put that wedge in there a little bit, like widen that crack a little bit so the light comes in. I have a couple of people I have done that skillfully, and then a couple of people I haven't. And I also use the block button quite a bit on my social media, which is great. Yeah.
I think, see, that's again, it's funny. It's with you and I, it's going back to this conversation and like how there's just air between us, you know? And if we could all just have that with each other, because I don't need to be right all the time. I'm never going to be right for anyone else anyway. I'm just going to be me. And like, I can't have any expectations. Whoo, that, I mean, I'm just like you. I work on that every day. I'm so fiery that I just couldn't even be online. I was like, oh no. I was like, I don't know if this is coming from a trigger or wisdom. And I was like, I need some time alone to like really, you know, get into myself more, and then now like this is me coming kind of into the world again. But wow, I mean, it's fun when you can really not take it too seriously, like,
That's right.
and that's when I feel more playful. And I think that's something that people forget, that we're like these, I love when what do you have you call us like little creatures, and like,
It's the little creature bodies.
yeah, the little creature bodies. And I know for myself, like if I don't play, like I mean, I get so serious, like my looks could literally, I feel like a tractor beam could like burn somebody to the ground. And essentially I do that, because people are like, oh, I don't want to be around her.
Pizza,
Pizza, pizza, pizza. And so it's so fun to like bring in that play again.
yes. especially for pitta. It's really good. That's very good instinct on your part. That's one of the things that you balance pitta is with playfulness. And like sometimes you like you do your yoga practice as a pitta person, you can blindfold yourself because the pitta, the organ of the fire, are the eyes. And so pitta people tend to compare themselves and measure up with other people. And so they get distracted when they see, oh, like somebody's doing better than they get into that competitive spirit. So if you blindfold yourself, like that is taken away and you have to be more playful and in tune with more subtle energy inside of yourself. So that's a fantastic way of balancing pitta, your pitta, playfulness.
That's
It's good
really
for everybody.
interesting. Blindfolded yoga. That sounds like fun, actually.
Yes.
I had my big yoga moment in a Tibetan yoga class, and they closed their eyes. So I'm guessing that's how I could go deep so fast.
Must have been a
Everything was
pitta.
in meditation.
Yeah, exactly. That must have been a pitta heavy person developing who instinctively felt it was good for them to close their eyes. They see that's what happens. Like if you're in touch, like if you're a vata person, what's good for you is have rhythm. So if you're smart, then and you stick with it, like if you're new, like you will always go through the door of the yoga practice that you're most familiar with. So pitta will tend to go into hot or extreme, like energetic yoga class, and vata will go into a vinyasa class. But if you're smart, you will start realizing, oh, okay, so for me, actually, as a vata person, it's good to hold poses for a little bit to calm down that flighty element. And then instinctively you start realizing what you need when you're agitated, like you need to put your hands and feet on the ground, which is great for a vata person, or smell an oil that helps balancing your, or do some gardening. So, or if you're pitta, like not to eat spicy food maybe on certain days when you're already hot and bothered, that you know how to cool down, that you go into a loving kindness practice or whatever. So there are these ways that we can work with ourselves very specifically that calms that flight, fight, or freeze response. So yeah,
Actually, I remember now, you work with essential oils.
I do.
That's, I think, a fantastic way
It's
to work on the energetic, emotional body of the human.
Yeah,
Maybe you
because
could talk
the
to us
oil
about.
goes directly into the hypothalamus. So like instead of like going through the cocktail, not just of emotion, but also actual hormones that are being, like there's a cocktail of hormones that is being released when you're triggered. So sometimes when you smell an oil, it can deactivate that that occurrence, which is really powerful. It goes directly through this sense of smell into your brain. And it can literally deactivate a certain trigger. Yeah, I use the oils a lot. They're very helpful.
Katchie Ananda, thank you so much for coming on to the summit today and sharing yourself with me and everyone who will watch this.
Thank you for having me, Julie. It was a pleasure to meet you.